My colony is Connecticut, and it's in the New England region. It was established in 1639. They wanted religious freedoms, and that gave them enough courage to travel to America. I will be comparing a teen from the 1600s, the 1960s, and the 21st century. The geography of Connecticut is much like it still is today. It is known for its many forests and different kinds of farms. They have dairy, orchard, vineyard, and fish farms because of their rocky soil. The history of Connecticut is a little unique. Back in the 1600s, the people that lived in Connecticut came from Massachusetts first. English officials from Massachusetts wanted to settle in Connecticut only so the Dutch couldn't have it. They began to settle by establishing small towns and villages along the Connecticut River. Colonists built good relationships with Indians and they started to farm. The new settlements provided their main goal of religious freedom and a secondary goal of economic opportunities. Eventually, relations with Native Americans were strained and ended in conflict and war. Despite that, Connecticut had the very first written constitution, the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut, and were claimed as an independent colony in 1662. A girl my age in the 1600s would be very busy doing chores around the house. She would have to babysit her siblings while her father worked all day on the farm. Her mother would teach her to make clothes, cook, clean, and tend gardens. Those would soon become her duties. In between house chores, she would have to feed chickens and milk cows on the farm. Clothing changes tremendously throughout the years, so you can imagine how different colonists dressed. Children wore velvet petticoats until they were 6 years old. Then they went straight to wearing the same thing as adults did. Women varied their headpieces and neck cover-ups depending on their taste. The basic corset, bodice, a full hoop skirt always stayed the same. The sleeves were always big and flowy. They wore lacy collars with very intricate beading. Richer teenagers would wear hoops under their skirts and decorative masks. Children and teens in the colonial times had to make up many of their own games. Things they played were tag, blind man's bluff, and marbles. Girls or their mothers would make dolls out of cloth. There were a few things that kids watched for entertainment. Kids attended horse races, watched people try to catch greased pigs, and occasionally bonded by having bonfires. Coming to a new land would naturally require a large amount of changes. The first colonists had a really hard first year. Winter was harshly cold and ships could not bring food and supplies through the river. They didn't know how to build houses for the longest time. That all changed when the Indians taught them things and helped them get through to spring. Another change colonists faced in Connecticut was a little while on. In the year 1639, the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut were being developed. It was a big change for everyone, but they all had to learn to adjust. Like anything, there would be arguments and debates about what to do. All the laws and leaders were changing, and it would have taken courage to accept anything until they were settled. Now we move on to my relative. I chose my Grandma Rose. Her teen years were from 1960 to 1966. My grandma grew up in Lake Mills, Iowa. It is a lot like Clear Lake, but despite the name, has no lake. It is very flat and is surrounded by farms. She lived on a farm in an area with many trees. One historical fact is that her house was only 3 miles away from an old Indian reserve. Grandma Rose had her fair share of chores. Every day she had to go around the house to dust and shake all of the rugs. Before she could do anything fun, she had to do farm work, chicken chores, and milk cows, which is quite similar to a teenager in the 1600s. Making clothes got a lot easier since the 1960s, but things they wore were still pretty simple. They had to dress like ladies and were not allowed to wear pants. For school, they had dress codes and wore uniforms. They often wore blouses, dresses, skirts, sweaters, and saddle shoes when they were at home or doing other activities. My grandma didn't have much free time between school and all of her chores. One thing that everyone looked forward to was a free movie every week. It was projected on a big screen outside and everyone would bring a blanket to sit on. Another thing that became popular was roller skating. Kids sometimes still do that today. Grandma Rose had one of the most difficult things in life to overcome. Her dad was killed in a tractor accident when she was 16. It was extremely difficult for her family, and they had to pull together to make the best of every situation. Lastly, on to me. I've been a teen since 2010, and I will be until 2016. We live in a time of technology, and everything is growing rapidly. I've lived in Clear Lake since I was 4, in North Iowa my whole life. Most of the land is flat with a few hills here and there. We have a big lake, which I think is why it is always so windy. Clear Lake is a very historical town. Every winter we have Christmas by the lake, and it is rated 12th in the nation of places to visit. We also have really hot summers, which bring in hundreds of tourists for our 4th of July celebrations. Our biggest historical feature, though, is the Surf Ballroom and Buddy Holly's crash site. The Surf Ballroom is the last place that Ritchie Valens, the Big Bopper, and Buddy Holly performed just before they died in a plane crash just outside of town. Kids and teens these days don't have as many responsibilities and chores. A few typical chores that I have to do are laundry, dishes, and cleaning my room. We teens get off pretty easy compared to our grandparents and the colonists. There are so many opinions on clothing these days, it feels like it's something that people just judge you by. The things that are trending right now are jeans, t-shirts, baggy shirts, leggings, boots, shorts, and flip-flops. Jeans are a classic that everyone wears and probably will wear for a long time. Most of the kids these days are glued to a computer or TV screen. Those things can be fun, but I prefer other activities. Most of my free time goes into sports, but I also love to hang out with friends and family. If you be creative, you will never run out of things to do, and you don't have to be lazy. A big change that I have overcome is my parents getting a divorce. It happened when I was only 4, but it still causes obstacles in my life. I was never okay with it until my dad met my now stepmom Wendy. It made me realize that everything happens for a reason. Sometimes it still makes things difficult, but I have learned to accept it and realize what finally matters in life. Generations have changed so much in the past 400 years. Everything we do and wear gets more advanced as time goes on. Everything is so different, yet we bond over what we have in common, our stories, our history, and where we came from. We would never be here if it weren't for the brave colonists who came first.